Catalonia's president is determined to hold a referendum on independence from Spain.
Hubo momentos de tensión anoche en las calles de Barcelona entre las fuerzas de seguridad y los manifestantes a favor de la independencia.
Aquesta ha estat la reacció als registres i detencions de la Guàrdia Civil.
Ganar la guerra de la propaganda es prácticamente imposible.
Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. Here are some of the stories we're covering this week. Barcelona versus Madrid. Not the football match, it's the media in competition over the Catalan independence story. Community radio stations in Mexico and the stories they tell. No place to hide. 2 more Syrian journalists are killed in Turkey. And millennials, listen up. Advertisers have got you all figured out.
You are special.
We begin the program with a story from the Catalonian corner of Spain, which is holding an independence referendum this weekend. The different ways in which the Spanish and Catalan media have reported on the referendum suggest that the coverage is 1 part journalism and 1 part propaganda. That reflects the positions of the governments involved, since the national government in Madrid is calling the whole referendum process unconstitutional. TVE, Spain's largest public broadcaster, is a channel once described by its own journalists as a propaganda instrument of the state. News outlets based in Catalonia aren't much better. The widely watched TV3, which gets more than half of its funding from the regional government, has been accused of indoctrinating the Catalan people rather than informing them. Catalan's pro-independence president, Carles Puigdemont, is a former journalist, so he knows a thing or two about shaping the media narrative. He's looking beyond Madrid and has been busily trying to convince international audiences through outlets like The Washington Post, The Guardian, and Le Monde, since bridging the media divide in his own country is proving to be a much more difficult task. Our starting point this week is the Catalan capital, Barcelona.
Los partidos no independentistas, sus dirigentes o los medios de comunicación están sufriendo episodios de acoso.
No va poder amb nosaltres el franquisme, no podrà ara un estat obsessionat, demofòbic, acabar amb el poble de Catalunya.
This isn't about 2 conflicting narratives. The state and private media in Catalonia have drawn up an absolutely hegemonic narrative, one-sided and full of lies.
Y tú estás defensant un règim que aposta per la repressió.
La gente, por ejemplo, que no quiere la independencia, guarda silencio, están prácticamente todos encerrados en sus casas, muchos por miedo a lo que pueda pasar.
Es muy raro.
It's very strange to assume that all people are deluded or that they have no mind of their own, and that a single TV station out of the 15 or 20 that broadcast in Catalonia, all of which are Spanish, is capable of mobilizing all this chaos we're seeing in this country.
Bien, el intermedio vuelve a llamar a la calma.
Spain and its media are so divided that this comedian is offering to play peacekeeper.
Recordad que somos los cascos azules de este conflicto. En primer lugar, porque nuestra intención es pacificar. Y en segundo lugar, porque el azul realza mi mirada.
Keeping the peace is a challenge when, in one corner, the Catalan one, stands a regional government determined to go ahead with an independence referendum a Spanish court has ruled unconstitutional. Standing alongside that government in Barcelona is a publicly funded channel, TV3, which has taken a clear stand.
Catalan public television is broadcasting the advertising calling for participating in the referendum, although it's been forbidden by the Constitutional Court.
Ara, més que mai, el futur de Catalunya és a les teves mans.
Professionals of the Catalan public service broadcaster, they have denounced what they consider to be a political instrumentalization of their TV.
Los medios de comunicación catalanes
Catalan media have established a frame of reference which reflects only the nationalist version of reality. They haven't even had to work at it too hard. They've simply excluded more than half of Catalonia's population from their frame of reference.
Els milers i milers de ciutadans que hi ha aquí és una capacitat de resistència extraordinària perquè, com us deien...
Los medios catalanes.
As the Catalan media, both pro-independence and anti, we defend that there is a majority of people who want to sort out the future of Catalonia and decide it with their votes. What divides the Catalan people is how to achieve this, and this division is also visible in the Catalan media.
If you look at certain daily newspapers, they have different editorial lines. Some support the right to vote on October 1st, some are against it. I don't see a coherent, unified message. It's exactly the opposite, in fact. There are many voices that articulate different opinions through these outlets.
On the print side of the Catalan media, there is diversity to be found. But it's on television where one sees the difference between a diversity of views and a balance of views. And it's not just TV3's news broadcasts. The lack of balance is glaring on what Spaniards call tertulias, daytime talk shows. Tertulias are cheap to produce, long on opinion, short on fact, and far from balanced, as this anti-independence voice, who found himself badly outnumbered on TV3, pointed out.
¿Por qué la repressió? Quina repressió? Estic en una tele pública amb 1, 2, 3, 4 independentistes contra algú que defensa la llei, l'ordre i la convivència.
Not what the host wanted to hear, but it's hard to argue with the math. To call Spain's national broadcaster, the Madrid-based TVE, a mirror image of Catalonia's TV3 would be an oversimplification. TVE has greater reach. It broadcasts nationwide, whereas TV3 is a regional channel. However, on the question of Catalan independence and the referendum, the imbalance issue plagues both channels.
En Cataluña, cuando no eres independentista, eres fascista. Bueno, eso ya lo tenemos muy conocido.
Los derechos.
En España, o sea, la gubernamentalización de las televisiones.
The influence of the government on public TV is not only a problem in Catalonia, it affects the whole country. It is very easy to fake pluralism, and this is what happens on TVE. But their advantage is that they have a presence across the whole Spanish territory and can portray a deformed message to the rest of Spain. The very same thing also happens in Catalonia.
When you see the media coverage from Madrid, there's just one melody, one song which says, "No way, they are wrong, they are deluded." A lot of times they say, "Oh, the opinions in Catalonia are very conditioned and manipulated by their media."
La oligarquía catalana manipulan al pueblo. Y dices, ¿cómo lo hacen? Pues muy sencillo. Los medios de comunicación para ahí están.
But here, every media outlet has a different opinion. Where media outlets are not different, where it's actually coercive and it sounds like they all play the same tune, is in Madrid.
I totally agree that TV is not really as neutral and balanced as it should be. For instance, they manipulate the images of the massive demonstrations, so they don't transmit the idea that there are that many people in the streets, but also in all these chat and debate programs, there are no representatives of the independentist movement. They are framing the issue from the governmental perspective.
We contacted TVE numerous times, offering the network a chance to respond to its critics. Our requests went nowhere. As for international news coverage, the Catalan government has clearly outmaneuvered its rivals in Madrid. Independence movements that export their stories are often seen as underdogs by distant news outlets that are less familiar with the granular detail of a contemporary political conflict and more prone to cultural and historical cliches. Catalan's president, Carles Puigdemont, a former journalist, also knows that when dealing with the foreign news media, it helps to speak their language.
Il faut se souvenir, il faut retenir qu'on a reçu un mandat clair.
The advantage of the independence movement here is that the last two presidents of the Catalan parliament, Artur Mas and Carles Puigdemont, communicate very well and speak various languages. They are proficient in English and French. It is clear that those who are pro-independence want to give this conflict an international look and feel to enable European mediation that would negotiate allowing Catalonia to vote in a referendum. That's the strategy, and it's been done very well.
Hay una cosa realmente trágica.
There is something really quite tragic going on here as far as journalism is concerned. Journalists are always looking for sensational stories. Any foreign journalists, the Anglo-Saxon ones in particular, are forever looking for even the slightest trace of the Spanish Civil War in contemporary events. So, the sensational approach is to say that we are dealing with a rebellion, an uprising that signals the end of the Spanish constitutional state. That's the approach our foreign colleagues are taking.
Spain is not the only country where the international media fall into that trap, resorting to lazy historical cliches. However, the real failings in the coverage lie with news outlets in Barcelona and Madrid. This is a tale of two stories, coming from two cities, with two governments pulling the strings and an electorate that deserves better.
Other media stories that are on our radar this week. An investigation is underway in Turkey after two exiled Syrian journalists who opposed the Assad regime were found murdered at their home in Istanbul. Hala Barakat, a freelancer who worked for the Turkish channel TRT World, ABC News, and Orient News, a Dubai-based outlet run by the Syrian opposition, was found stabbed to death alongside her mother, Oruba, a veteran journalist and a member of the Syrian National Coalition, an anti-Assad expat group. Family members say both women had received death threats. According to Turkish police, there are no suspects in this case. 4 exiled Syrian journalists have been killed in Turkey over the past 2 years. The New York-based Committee to Protect Journalists said Turkey must ensure the protection of Syrian journalists who have fled the country seeking safety. We call on authorities to find those responsible for the murders and bring them to justice. In India, media watchers are reading between the lines, trying to figure out if the editor of the country's second largest English-language newspaper really decided to quit his job or was pushed out by the government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Bobby Ghosh resigned from the Hindustan Times September 11th, citing personal reasons. This past week, though, it emerged that Ghosh's resignation came shortly after Prime Minister Modi had held a meeting with the paper's owner, Shabhana Bhartia. The HT insists that meeting had nothing to do with Ghosh's resignation and that, quote, no external party, and that includes the PM or any member of the government, has had any say or influence in the matter. Ghosh was appointed the HT's editor-in-chief in 2015, a year after Modi was elected on a largely Hindu nationalist platform. Under Ghosh, the HT focused on the rise of nationalism in the country 3 months ago. The paper launched a hate tracker, an online reporting tool documenting hate crimes in India. That tracker appears to have stopped updating about a week after the departure of the editor. The authorities in the Central African country of Cameroon seem to be taking a two-pronged approach to leaning on journalists there. They've been accused of using an anti-terror law to silence critics, and this past week they suspended dozens of reporters and warned news outlets over what they called biased reporting. Among the outlets affected are the newspapers La Nouvelle Expression, La Météo, L'Anecdote, as well as a radio station based in the capital Yaoundé, Amplitude FM. The head of Cameroon's media regulator, the NCC, said the media outlets cited were not adhering to the rules of journalism and that he had acted after complaints from government ministers, among others. The NCC took action just a few days after the Committee to Protect Journalists published a report criticizing the Cameroonian government for using its anti-terror laws to target reporters from English-speaking regions, including Radio France Internationale broadcaster Ahmed Abba, who's been jailed for 10 years. When the government passed those anti-terror laws in 2014, it said they were needed to counter the Boko Haram extremist group. Even in an era when the internet has changed the way we consume content, there are good reasons why radio still appeals to audiences. It's intimate, accessible, and relatively cheap to produce, which suits small communities with outlooks and issues of their very own. Take Mexico, population 110 million. In such a geographically and culturally diverse country, community radio stations provide local news and views that mainstream news outlets do not. Sometimes that brings them into conflict with the authorities and also with criminal elements, drug gangs, with deadly results. There's a new law promising community radio stations a small slice of the federal government's advertising budget, but that's a bit of a double-edged sword. The stations could always use a revenue injection, but could government money become a threat to their independence? The Listening Post's Will Young now on community radio in Mexico, what it means to audiences and what the future might hold.
Estás escuchando XEYTM 1490 kHz. Muy buenos, excelentes días, tengan todos y cada uno.
Lo que hace la...
What community media does is facilitate freedom of expression. It provides a mechanism for citizen participation, since it allows them to be part of the public debate. Radio Teocelo is an interesting case. It is the community which sustains the station.
La comunidad es la que mantiene la radio.
Somos Radio Teocelo.
Radio Teocelo has been broadcasting for more than 50 years in the southern state of Veracruz. It's the oldest community radio station in Mexico, run almost entirely by volunteers and funded by monthly subscriptions, local raffles and concerts. That community money and time goes right back to the people in the form of shows like Cabildo Abierto or Open Town Hall.
Estamos nuevamente en este espacio de Cabildo Abierto. Bienvenido, licenciado Abel, buenos días.
Cabildo Abierto.
Local politicians have been very keen to appear on Cabildo Abierto so they can compete with political opponents over who is more efficient, more transparent and more democratic.
Son casi 4 años en la administración municipal. ¿Qué logros ha tenido?
Bueno, pues los logros que hemos tenido
Here, local officials feel obliged to come to us and defend their actions publicly. If public officials refuse to appear, it is because they are doing something wrong.
Es porque algo están haciendo mal.
97.3 FM, La Voladora Radio, radio comunitaria.
Radio La Voladora was a mobile pirate radio station run by student activists until the year 2000, when it settled in Ameca Meca, in the shadow of an active volcano. That year, the volcano erupted, and national media created a local panic by misreporting a call to evacuate. Radio La Voladora broadcast the facts, helped calm the situation, and found a permanent home on the local airwaves.
We have programs which discuss the preservation of culture, social issues, political commentary on local and national topics. We often say our programming is kaleidoscopic because it mixes all these voices and realities. A member of the community comes to us and suggests a program according to what she would like to talk about, what she would like to hear. This is how the community participates, how they listen to the radio.
There are community radio stations for workers, which build support for labor reforms and issues around their jobs. There are environmentalists, feminists, stations for different age groups. This contributes to a media system which is much more plural and diverse. The classic example is for indigenous communities to be able to broadcast in their own languages, in their own culture.
La radio comunitaria Jënpoj 107.9 de FM.
Radio Jënpoj broadcasts in the tiny mountain municipality of Santa Maria Tlahuitoltepec in the state of Oaxaca. It broadcasts in a mix of Spanish and the indigenous language Ayuk.
The ethos of our radio station is to break the mental structures that we can't do media with our language and traditions. None of us are communicational professionals. We do this out of need. Our radio station reinforces our oral traditions, our festivals, how our community is organized, the knowledge of our lands, our historical memory. Not only so we can speak Ayuk, but to demystify many things and decolonize our minds.
Commercial television is completely unrepresentative of Mexico, not ethnically, nor racially, nor culturally. Those who are represented are white upper-middle-class people. In general, there is little space for new cultural expressions, for the young, for indigenous people, or women in different leadership roles or positions.
For commercial media, we only exist in sensationalist news, crime news, or disasters. We are the poor people in need of help.
La suspensión de los vuelos hace aún más vulnerables a los indígenas que viven en pobreza extrema.
Our community life is not shown. Commercial media shows a stereotype, a type of imaginary society which does not exist except for a very few. The great majority of Mexicans do not exist in this image that the media are pushing.
Far from selling the status quo, community radio stations such as La Voladora have both reported and stood alongside social movements that have been pushing for political change in Mexico since the election of President Enrique Peña Nieto in 2012. Veronica Galicia has herself received anonymous death threats and been arrested by police.
Security is now an issue all over the country, and Ameca Meca is experiencing kidnappings, the murder of women and extortion. Radio La Voladora tackles these issues, but not in a detached manner as something that happened to someone else, but as a real condition affecting the social fabric of the community.
Laborar en un medio de comunicación se ha convertido en un trabajo de riesgo. Informar, buscar información, decir lo que otros no dicen.
A la vuelta de la esquina.
When you come out of our radio station, round the corner might be someone you have mentioned in your reports, who can do whatever they want to you. Other media and journalists do not face this risk because they are removed from the rural and indigenous environment.
How many indigenous community radio journalists have been killed? 4, 2 last year and 2 in 2008. Because of this, our relations with the Mexican state, with local government, is one of distrust. Last year, in Nochitlan, Oaxaca, police used force against the striking teachers, killing 8 of them. We covered the story consistently and demanded that local authorities organize a public demonstration.
Una movilización de carácter comunitario, de carácter colectivo.
It was historic and unprecedented for this region with the closing of roads and the seizure of public buildings. The march rallied 10,000 people from 8 or 10 towns.
Many of these stations have had to suffer attacks and aggressions precisely because of their critical stance. They are not usually beloved by the authorities. They are inconvenient, since journalism is inconvenient to power.
Which is why the idea of accepting government money makes many community radio stations uncomfortable. Mexico's new broadcast law requires that federal agencies spend 1% of their advertising budgets on community radio airtime. It's a tiny proportion of an enormous sum, hardly a windfall, and the fear that many community radio stations share is that government money will bring with it the government's message.
This reform does not really benefit us since it compromises our relationship with social movements. These funds can be understood as a payment to the media. In the end, we decided that this money was not a gift given to us by the authorities, but a right, and we want to exercise that right.
The issue of this 1% demonstrates how little interest the Mexican state has in indigenous community radio stations. 1% doesn't compare to what we contribute as volunteers, making programs day after day. We give much more than 1%. And for whom is the other 99%? Where does the other 99% go?
The trend is to fund media which flatter the authorities, but this has to stop. Communication resources must be allocated to all media in a fair and equal way, not punishing those media that are critical. We are treating this issue with caution because we don't want community radio to become dependent on public money.
While questions of impunity, lawlessness and corruption beset the Mexican government, the country's centralized corporate media can only tell, at best, one side of the story. Community radio stations reflecting and representing social movements, rural communities, indigenous peoples and women are a better expression of Mexico's true diversity and are demanding a say in its future.
Finally, speak to advertising executives and they'll tell you that if you want to push a product, first you need to understand your target demographic. These days, ad companies are looking for millennials, and they've clearly come up with what they think is a winning formula. It mixes inspiration and empowerment with a pinch of anything is possible. The following video, produced with stock footage from Dissolve, a company based in Canada, is called "This Generic Ad Will Make Millennials Buy Whatever You're Selling." And we're buying what they're saying. We'll see you next time here at The Listening Post.
You are unique. You are different. You are special. We definitely get that. We understand everything about you, especially the way you talk online, like totes, BRB, and join the conversation. You say that, right? The point is, you are free. But that's just how millennials roll, according to our thought leaders. Most of all, you guys are having fun. Fun with your phones. Fun with your apps. Can you remind us of the cool new app everyone is using again? We totes know, but we just wanted to see if you know. Wait, where are you going? Is this a BRB? Are you swiping left on us? No problem. We focus group this scenario, and we shall BRB as well.